we are going to proceed along during this day and have some stories that will hopefully keep us all inspired. We are going to start out with Barry Gray. Barry is one of the founding storytellers at the Proctor Festival, and he's always like to have back again. And let's see, what much can I say about Barry other than he's always a reliable person to tell you a good tale. And like my grandmother, he's also part of my inspiration for doing this, because the Proctor event is where the seed that I got in my youth sort of started to nurture and grow. So Barry, I'd like to invite you up and entertain for the folks.
Thank you, Craig. Do I have to stand on this?
Wherever you wish, sir.
So if I speak like this, can you hear me at the back?
I hear it straight.
Good. So I'm too very happy to be here. Thank you. Thank you again for inviting me. Okay. I appreciate that. Can you help me with a few other things in my life too?
Let me know.
Talk afterwards. Is that good for everybody?
Yeah.
All right, like that? Okay.
Better, yeah.
Can't see my red T-shirt anymore.
Oh, yeah, we can.
Oh.
Yeah. It's important.
So I'm going to tell you a story from my childhood. I grew up in Harrop, and I lived just downstream of the Harrop ferry. And at my house, we had a little piece of beachfront there, and from my house, from the balcony especially overlooking the West Arm, I could see the ferry leaving the other side, over on the Redfish side, and I could watch it coming across towards Harrop for about the first 2 minutes or so of its trip across. And then it disappeared behind the big cottonwoods and the little bend in the lake there. And I could always hear when the ramp slammed down onto the pavement on the Harrop side. I loved the Harrop ferry. It was a big part of my life. I loved it. I loved everything about it. I loved the sound of the ramps, even if they woke my dad up in the middle of the night and he always complained about it. And I loved the jumping game we used to play back and forth between those two big cement blocks that hold the cables in place. And I just loved everything about the ferry. I even loved those big greasy black poles there by the ramps. Not that I ever touched them or anything. And I remember the spring. I remember it very well, because my love for the ferry later that year, it changed greatly. It didn't change from love to hate or anything. It changed to fear. I'll let you know what that was about after. I remember, because I went to school just across there. It only took us 5 minutes or so from the ferry. We'd walk up the hill and down Pipper's Lane and then off to the Redfish School. And that was part of, it was my life with my friends on the ferry. We'd be running around, we'd be watching the spiders on the railings, we'd be climbing on the railings, we'd be looking under, it was our life, it was our world. I remember one time in the spring, we were on our way to school, and the spiders were, it was an especially warm day, and the spiders were out for almost the first time that year, and they were everywhere. And we started noticing that there were great big egg sacs in the railing, like up under the top plate, and tucked up into the corners of the angle iron, and became the game was just running around looking at the egg sacs, trying to find the biggest one and call everybody over to see my egg sac. Well, I happened to be looking at one. It was on the end of the ferry, not the side, on the railing on the Harrop end of the ferry. And I saw this one egg sac. It looked a little different than the rest of them for some reason. I don't know what was different about it. But I didn't call anybody over for some reason. I'm not even sure why. I didn't mention it to anybody, but I just didn't feel like it. And then we landed, and we had to go off to school, and I just forgot about it. A few days later, I went back, and I looked again, and I realized that although all the other egg sacs all over the place were starting to change, they're starting to swell. You could see that there were 100 or a couple hundred eggs in every one of them. Mine was just looking exactly the same. For whatever reason, I still didn't call anybody over to look at it. I just kind of kept it to myself. I thought about that a lot, wondering why I did that. I didn't realize at the time why. I still don't know why. I never told anybody about it. But I did. I remember the day when I noticed what was different about it. It wasn't a bundle of eggs. It wasn't 100 like in some of the other egg sacs. It was a single egg. I never saw the spider that was around it had laid that egg and tucked it up there under that railing. And the weather was beautiful that spring. All the other egg sacs hatched, and there were thousands of little spiders all over the ferry. That's, I guess, why there are so many, because some of them get really big and back and forth across the water. It's always full of flies and mosquitoes. But my egg sac still hadn't changed, even until the time school ended and summer came. I wasn't on the ferry nearly as much anymore. But I'd go out there again, or if we were going to Nelson or Balfour, I'd get out of the car and I'd go and have a look, and it was still there. And it looked exactly the same as it had in the spring. And I remember one July, I guess, it was a really hot day, and I told my mom I was just going to go over and ride back and forth on the ferry a few times. It's okay with her, just to cool off on the breeze. I went and looked again, and it was still there. I remember the day in August, hot August day, I went just to have another look, and it was gone. All this time I thought maybe it had died and it wasn't going to hatch, and I actually was feeling kind of sad about that, but there was nothing I could do about it. But I did see that the sticky web stuff that was there, maybe something like probably the casing or something to the egg, was still just hanging there under the railing. So I hung around for a while, right where the side and the end railing meet. I sort of leaned in the corner there and just watching down the railing. But I never did see the spider, and I really wanted to see it. And a day or two later, I went back, and I just sat there. I just stood in my corner looking up and down, and cars coming and going. I rode back and forth a few times, saw some of my friends, waved to them, hung out for a few minutes, even on the ferry with a couple of my friends who were going to Ainsworth or something. And then one day I saw it. I saw it. It was just under the spot where it had been hatched, right by the ramps, just sort of at the bottom of one of those big greasy black poles there. And I saw the spider. It was only about a week or so after it had hatched. And it was not unlike the rest of the spiders on the ferry, except that it was bigger. And it was only a week old, and it was bigger than any of them I had ever seen. Probably the body was as big as my thumbnail. And I still didn't tell anybody about it. But I went back as often as I could for the rest of that summer watching. There must have been a lot of bugs and stuff, because by the end of August, that spider was almost the size of the palm of my hand. And it was starting to get a little bit scary. But I still, for whatever reason, didn't tell anybody about it. And one day, towards the end of September, I was on the ferry and I saw the spider. And of course the spider, after a while, I had the feeling that it knew when I was watching it. It never looked at me, or it never made any sign that it knew that I was watching, but somehow it was more at ease. And I never saw it if anybody was near me or if anybody else was around, if I was hanging out with anybody. But by the end of, into September, I realized that something very different was happening with this spider. I don't think I'm crazy, because I don't want you to think I'm crazy, because this is true. I was watching it one day. It had just climbed up to the top of that pole that holds the cables that lift the ramp, and it was on the back side of the post, so the operator couldn't see it, on the Harrop end of the ferry. And we were just approaching the Redfish side, and everybody was back in their cars already. Some people had already started their engines, and the operator, it's right at that moment when he really has to be paying attention to land the ferry. And that spider was at the top. It was about the size of both my fists together. And I was watching it. One of the only other things that I found at the time as fascinating as that was when I'd watch an osprey hit the water and come out with the fish. Well, that, by chance, had just happened, and I saw that big spider up at the back of the pole. And the fish, the osprey was just flying over with the fish that it had caught. And I don't know if the fish had been really struggling or what, but the osprey dropped the fish. And the spider must have been watching, because that spider hooked to that top of that post, let out a line and swung out over the ramp, and then back out over the water. And the timing was impeccable. Right when that fish came, the spider was right at the top of its arc, and it grabbed that fish out of the air, let out more line, and it came sliding, came flying back down. It smashed up against the sides of the ramps on the ferry, and it wasn't hurt, and it didn't drop the fish. And it crawled in under the ramp, and I had been trying to see where it was going every time I had seen it. There must have been a hole. It was right, there was this big overhang there under the ramps. And as far as I could lean out as far as I wanted, I just couldn't see where it went. I even remember the time when the operator yelled at me to get off the railing. It was so embarrassing because he even knew my name. But this time, something must have changed, because I saw that spider again about a week later. I was just leaning up in the corner there again, looking at that spot, and the spider had another fish. There was no osprey around. And I mean, you've all seen spiders. The spiders swim. If they fall in the water, they'll swim. But this spider was wet on its back. It had been underwater. And the fish that I saw it with was bigger than the last one that I had seen it with. Well, that was when I stopped walking onto the ferry. And now, I said it once already, and I don't want you to think I'm crazy, but that spider was about the size of our cat when it curls up. And I wouldn't get out of the car anymore. My family thought something was wrong, but I just ignored them and went away, and we thought nothing of it anymore after a while. But I started watching the ferry more and more from our balcony. And I'd watch it with the binoculars. And I'd hear when I knew when it was on the Harrop side, because I'd heard the ramp slam, and I'd go up to the balcony and I'd watch, and it would come out from around the bend in the river there and the cottonwood trees, and I'd see the ferry coming out, that ferry that I used to love so much. 3 times in September that year, I saw another fish being hauled up. And I don't know, there must have been a pretty big hole up in there somewhere. My dad had seen the Harrop ferry once at the dry dock in for repairs. And he told me that there were these big empty spaces, big hollow spaces in there for flotation, I guess. And I just imagined that that's where the spider lived, in the underbelly of the Harrop ferry. And it was really getting quite freaky, and I still don't to this day know why I never told my family about it, my parents about it. Then one night our neighbor's cat went missing. And somebody up on Lewis Road said that they had seen a cougar, so everybody figured that's where it was. They put posters up at the ferry, and then somebody's dog went missing over on Arundel Road. And so they called the conservation officer, and they hired that guy over in Long Beach that has the bloodhounds, and he tracked the cougar, and they shot him. They figured that would be the end of the problem, but a few more cats went missing. And another dog, one of those big German shepherds. That guy over on Arundel Road who has so many shepherds. And this was when I was I watched it one night again. I saw it from my balcony. It was just before dark. And it was about the size of our chocolate lab. And one night it was, I remember it quite clearly. I know it was a full moon, the end of October. I was watching. I was out on the balcony. The balcony was off our spare bedroom, so nobody in the house ever knew that necessarily that I was out there, and I had my binoculars. And it was really cold out there. The cedar boards on the balcony were really stinging underfoot, and I was standing out there trying to warm my feet and watching. And you probably have heard that elk and deer, they could swim. Well, I'd even heard a story in Harrop that the operator of the ferry had seen a moose swimming across the West Arm one time. But I just happened to see a cross over in Long Beach. I saw a deer, whitetail, little whitetail, go into the water. It was going to swim across. And I was watching with my binoculars. And right then I knew that the ferry would be coming out from behind the trees. And I looked over. I didn't want to because my heart was pounding like crazy. I looked over and I saw this shape swimming fast downstream with the current straight towards that deer. It didn't see it coming. Even though it had drifted with the current already 100 feet downstream, I saw them go underwater together, and I didn't see what happened because I couldn't see it. But that spider hauled that deer up dead onto the beach right in front of my house. I thought I was going to watch it devour it, but it didn't. It kept it in the shallow water and started working its way, dragging it in the shallow water up around towards the ferry again, because I knew then that it wouldn't eat it on the shore. It lived in those spaces under the car deck of the Harrop ferry. And I imagined it, that it would go around swimming around all the docks, and that it would wait until the ferry was just leaving. I couldn't see it there, but I just saw everything in my mind. And then it would wait until the operator was looking in the other direction, hiding in the shadows of the last dock, just right before the ferry. And then it would probably use 4 or 5 of its legs to swim out to the ferry as it was leaving, and haul that deer in up under the ramp somewhere. I even tried to imagine whether it could get the whole deer into the hole, or whether it would rip it limb by limb into pieces and then haul those in. But I was wrong. It didn't do that while it was hidden behind the trees. It reached the ferry just as it was coming out from behind the trees, where I'd seen it so often with its little tattered British Columbia flag flapping in the wind. I saw it haul that deer up in under the ferry and disappear. I was terrified. I didn't sleep that night. And about a week later, exactly a week later, I remember because the moon was half, it was clear again, beautiful night. And I was looking out across the lake in the night, over to Long Beach. And what I had experienced just a week earlier was nothing. Nothing compared to what I saw across the water. I had only ever seen one bear before in my life. and that was a black bear, and I had seen it from a car, but I could tell by the size and by the hump that this was a grizzly. And it entered the water and started swimming across towards Harrop. It must not have wanted to be carried downstream because it was angling upstream slightly, swimming against the current a little bit, so with the effect that it was coming straight across. And I had heard the ramps. I knew that the ferry would be coming out from behind the trees soon. And my heart was pounding. My feet were frozen to the deck. I was shivering with cold out there. It was a beautiful, bright cold. There'd been a heavy frost already early November, and I was wondering. I remember what that spider would do in the winter. Would it just live on fish, or anything else it found in the night? I didn't want to look up towards the ferry. I was afraid of what I might see, but I had to. And just as the ferry came out, I saw this great shape. I was surprised at first, shocked, because it was as big as the grizzly itself that was coming towards my shore. And it started coming downstream. I thought the grizzly, when it saw it would just swim downstream and up onto the shore and through the trees over the tracks and up into the mountains behind us, up towards Mill Lake, but no, it turned in the other way, and it swam towards the spider that was coming towards it. They started to roll in the water. Sometimes I couldn't tell which was on top. They were both, it was dark, and they were both hairy and black. And sometimes the spider would be on top, and sometimes the bear was on top. And it was actually a beautiful, beautiful movement. It was like great dancers rolling around in the cold current of the West Arm there. But this was no dance, and these were no loving embraces. They went underwater, and I was frozen. watching. Suddenly, I came towards the shore right in front of my house. And I looked and I saw a great dark shape haul itself up onto the shore. And I looked out into the water and I saw the other shape just drifting slowly down with the current. It was still. And that beast lay on the beach for a few minutes. Finally, it raised its head and shook the water from its fur and got up onto all fours, walked off down the beach. I could tell that it was limping very badly with one of its front legs, and that it was actually dragging one of its hind legs. Well, I often wondered what happened to that bear, whether it made it to its den or whether it just found some quiet spot to lie in the forest and lick its wounds and die. The spider? I assume it hung up somewhere down in the rocky depths of the west arm, and the bottom feeders took care of that carcass. I only know that I want to go to the dry dock the next time the Harrop ferry is in for servicing. I want to see the bones.